Why are there only two major political parties in the United States? Many other democracies, such as Canada, Europe, and other regions, have more than two parties. So why is the US the outlier? Politics and religion are both topics that are very controversial and touchy to talk about, but both are concentrations of human geography. And US electoral geography is one of those topics. Of course, the politics side of the subject is extremely heated in this day and age. However, the geography side of it is quite interesting. Historically, the United States did have more than a two party system. This changed in the early mid 20th century when the Democrats and Republicans exclusively became the two major parties. Why did this happen? In this episode, we're going to explain some of those reasons. If you want to give your opinion on this topic, please do so in the comment section below. Let's get started. When George Washington became the first president in 1789, he was an independent. He warned against creating political parties as he felt it would create divisions, potentially breaking up the nation. In the next presidential election in 1792, Washington ran uncontested and received 100% of the vote. When the 1796 election came along, political parties started to appear, as John Adams ran as a Federalist and Thomas Jefferson ran as a Democratic Republican. John Adams won the 1796 election, then in 1800, Thomas Jefferson won. Him winning would produce 28 years worth of Democratic Republican presidents, including James Madison, James Monroe, and John Quincy Adams. In 1828, the current Democratic Party was founded by Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren, and Jackson won the 1828 presidential election. After this, other political parties started to make inroads in general elections. In the 1832 presidential election, 4 candidates ran for office, and parties represented included Democratic, National Republican, Nullifier, and Anti-Masonic. Each party carried at least one state in the Electoral College. The 1836 election featured 5 candidates and other parties, including the newly formed Whig Party. Again, each candidate carried at least one state in the Electoral College. But the 1832 and 1836 election were won by Democrats. It wasn't until 1840 that Whig Party member William Henry Harrison won the presidency. But he only was president for 31 days, as he died of pneumonia. His vice president, John Tyler, took over, but was an independent throughout his presidency. He lost to Democrat James Polk in 1844, then Polk lost to Whig Zachary Taylor in 1848. After Taylor died of fruit poisoning in office, Millard Fillmore became president and the last Whig ever to hold presidential office. Fillmore lost to Winfield Scott for the Whig nomination for the 1852 presidential election, but ultimately, Democrat Franklin Pierce won the election. Then in 1856, the newly formed Republican Party, an anti-slavery party, was part of the presidential ballot. The candidate, John C. Fremont, carried many northern states, but lost the general election to Democrat James Buchanan. Buchanan served from 1857 to 1861 and did not choose to run in the 1860 election. With that happening, the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, won that election. This election started a trend of two-party elections with only Republicans and Democrats. From 1864 to 1888, all of those elections only had two parties represented, with Republicans winning all except the 1884 and 1892 elections, which Democrat Grover Cleveland won. In that 1892 election, third-party populist candidate James B. Weaver carried 5 states for the Electoral College, but it wasn't until 1912 again when in that election 4 parties were represented on the ballot, including a new and short-lived Progressive Party started by former Republican President Theodore Roosevelt, who ran because he opposed William Taft's change to the Republican Party. Roosevelt did receive 88 electoral votes, way ahead of the 8 Taft received and the 0 Socialist Eugene V. Debs received, but way behind Woodrow Wilson's 435, who won the election. Since this election, there have been third-party candidates, and some have secured electoral votes. However, none of them ever won. From 1912 to today, the third-party candidate who received the most electoral college votes was George Wallace in 1968, who won Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, and his home state Alabama. Wallace, the governor of Alabama, ran as an American independent, a populist pro-law and order party who appealed to working-class white people. Since then, No third-party candidate on the presidential ballot has secured Electoral College votes. Ross Perot in 1992 did receive nearly 19% of the popular vote and 8.4% of the popular vote in 1996, but didn't win any electoral votes in both elections. For the last 6 presidential elections, only Democrats and Republicans have secured Electoral College votes, with some third-party candidates receiving popular votes, but a minuscule amount. There are several reasons why the U.S. is a two-party system today. The first reason has to do with the context of ideology. The early Federalist and Democratic Republican parties had ideological differences, with the Federalists supporting a strong centralized government, like the current Democratic Party, while the Democratic Republicans supported a limited central government, like today's Republicans. The Democratic Party Andrew Jackson created was considerably different than today's party in that it supported a weaker federal government, support for individual civil liberties, and support for working class people such as farmers and laborers. Because of that, Southern states were staunch supporters of the Democratic Party until the 1960s, when there was a switch to the Republican side. On the other hand, the original Republican Party was seen as sort of a more progressive party, as that it was against slavery, for regulation and workers' rights, and for the conservation of the environment, as was seen especially with Theodore Roosevelt. William Taft started the slow progression to the current Republican Party, who now supports limited government and conservative values. Overall, ideologically, today's two major parties are stronger than all other parties, and they're opposites, which gives voters a choice of either progressive liberal stances or conservative stances. Another reason is the winner-takes-all system implemented into presidential elections. When a state's popular vote is counted, the candidate who wins it secures all the electoral votes for that state. With a smaller overall population, third-party candidates in the 1800s and the 1900s had a better chance of winning some states. In 1968, many of the 5 southern states, won by George Wallace, had a voting bloc that supported his ideology. But today, the ideologies of many third-party movements have been mixed into the Democrat and Republican parties. Some Democrats are more progressive than other Democrats, while some Republicans are more moderate or even perceived as liberal compared to others of that party. However, even when the outlier Democrats or Republicans run for office, particularly presidential office, the mainstream candidate typically wins the primaries and becomes a candidate. But this has changed in recent years, as will be discussed soon. Money plays a role in why there is a two-party system. Generally, the Democratic and Republican parties have large lobbying power, which enables candidates of each to raise significant amounts of money. Even though technically anyone can run for president, if that somebody doesn't have the money behind them, they're not going to win. Also, with money comes attention. Obviously, money can buy advertising and media coverage, which in turn allows that candidate to receive more support. On the other hand, third-party candidates do not get the attention and have a poorer chance of winning a presidential election, and even Senate or congressional elections. In fact, out of the 100 senators, only 3 are independent: Angus King, Kyrsten Sinema, and Bernie Sanders, and each has been historically Democratic. In Congress, there are only exclusively Democrats and Republicans. With the division of politics today, there is a possibility that other political parties will pop up. Not so long ago, if politicians were Democrats, they agree on most issues with other Democrats, and if politicians were Republicans, they agree on most issues with other Republicans. There was even more bipartisanship between the two parties, which allowed for easier passing of bills. Then, in the 2000s, things started to change. Some candidates within the two political parties started disagreeing with their respective parties' ideologies. For example, Bernie Sanders was seen as one of the most progressive politicians in Congress and later Senate, differing from moderate Democrats. Ron Paul, a congressman, was a Republican from 1996 to 2015, but was also a registered Libertarian before 1996 and now since 2015. Libertarians typically share Republican ideologies, but differ on certain social issues, budget spending, individual civil liberties, and foreign affairs. For example, Ron Paul voted against the Patriot Act, which increased governmental surveillance, and the war in Iraq. Both were strongly supported by the establishment Republicans and Democrats, and Bernie Sanders, a progressive, opposed both. Ron Paul's son, Rand, is now a Republican senator and is seen as a libertarian in the party, but not as much as his father. Then came the 2016 U.S. presidential election. In June 2015, businessman Donald Trump announced he was running as a Republican for the presidency. Initially, he was seen as an outlier since he did run as a third-party candidate in 2000. However, Trump slowly gained more and more support, and by the end of 2015, he was seen as a frontrunner, beating out establishment candidates such as Jeb Bush, John Kasich, and Marco Rubio. By early May of 2016, Trump secured a nomination by beating out Ted Cruz, who was also seen as more of a non-establishment politician. Ultimately, Donald Trump won the 2016 U.S. presidential election, receiving 304 Electoral College votes over Hillary Clinton's 227, but Clinton won the popular vote. Trump made history by being the first non-politician candidate ever to win presidency. During his presidency, Trump did align with the Republican Party on certain issues, but differed with them on others such as foreign policy, trade agreements, and immigration policies, all of which were seen as populist. In the 2020 presidential election, Democrat Joe Biden, a former vice president and an establishment politician, won the election. So far during his presidency, Biden went back to a more Democrat-oriented government, reversing many of Trump's policies. Now as we approach 2024, we are starting to see some concerns, as many Americans believe Biden is too old to be president, which if re-elected, he'll be 82. Also, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of Robert Kennedy, and the nephew of John F. Kennedy, announced his candidacy for president. Kennedy is seen as a fringe non-establishment candidate, with controversy surrounding his stance on vaccines. But in recent polling, he has quite a bit of support, with some polls showing him between 10 to 20%. Possibly, this could be the start of a switch of the widening other sectors of the Democratic Party. On the Republican side, Donald Trump is seen as a frontrunner to be nominated, beating out all establishment Republicans. And second to him in polling is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who shares ideological similarities. Is this a sign of splitting, creating new political parties? Possibly. With Republican voters especially, there's a split between mainstream establishment Republicans and populist Republicans. Soon the Republican Party may break apart, creating new segments. One of those segments that may become more and more popular is libertarianism, as many citizens are for policies such as limited governmental involvement. Overall, in the coming years, we may see the introduction of new political parties stemming out from the mainstream Democratic and Republican parties. On the Democratic side, we may see the far-left socialist movements who think the mainstream Democratic Party is too conservative, and moderate blue dog movements who think the mainstream Democratic Party has gone too far left. On the Republican side, we may see more MAGA Republicans, known as Trump-style politicians, who support populism and non-intervention in foreign affairs, but are seen by never-Trumper Republicans and most Democrats as authoritarian, far-right, and fascist. More libertarian factions of the Republican Party may appear, which promote less governmental involvement. And there will always likely be a mainstream Republican faction and a Democratic faction. One thing for sure is American political geography will see change. What do you think? Will the U.S. ever have more than two major political parties? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you like content like this, subscribe to my channel, Our World, Our Planet, Our Home. Until next time.